What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg Magic Talk. And you know how yesterday I said we didn't have any time to waste because we had to look at like 35 cards from the Lorehold Guild? Well, today Wizards gave us 40 cards to look at, so really don't have much time. It was Prismari Day today. We got to see a lot of stuff from the Blue-Red Guild, but there were a bunch of cards that weren't necessarily in that guild that I still think are worth looking at. So let's start with those. So let's start off some Strixhaven previews with Arrogant Poet, Enormous Disappointment, and Bat Eye is what everyone's calling these. These mostly look like lower rarity limited pieces, but in the case of a couple of these, I think there's actually a case to be made. But Arrogant Poet, not necessarily. This looks like the most limited viable of all of these cards and not much more. It's just 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/1 human warlock, and whenever it attacks, you may pay 2 life. If you do, it gains flying until end of turn. So this looks like, it reminds me of, and that makes me feel good, the old like black aggro decks from way back in the day that didn't mind losing a bunch of life so far as the opponent lost life at a faster clip. So go right at home in those decks, but I just don't think it's super good today. In limited, it's probably fine. All right, so long as you're very aggro-oriented, you don't mind losing that life. For a little bit of evasion, it's not bad on curve, right? The body's okay and limited. It'll trade sometimes on the ground. All this is pretty good. It does kind of suck that it can't, like, gain flying to block or whatever, but if you're looking to mostly go aggressive, you'll probably include a copy or 2 of this just to, you know, better your curve. But aside from that, I'm not really seeing too much. But Enormous Disappointment, I'm not disappointed in this card. It's 4 mana, 3 and a black for an instant. Each player loses 2 life, draws 2 cards. At least I'm not disappointed with the function of the card. As an instant, draw 2 cards in black is pretty good. It's not terrible, at the very least. I like instant speed card draw in black. So I'll give this a pass. I think a lot of black decks in Constructed will just, you know, play blue and play like way better card drawing options. But, you know, in those rare cases where you want to build Mardu and draw cards, maybe a couple of copies of this is in order if you're just building a control deck, because I think the instant speed makes this okay. But I'll move on to Bat Eye. This is just a black mana for a 1/1 flyer, and when it dies, you'll learn. So that's actually not that bad. It's really not. It's basically a 1/1 flyer for 1 that draws a card when it dies, draws a card out of your sideboard, or maybe you pitch something, you know, you pitch a big creature into the graveyard or a guy with escape or something like that, and then you draw a card. And that's actually not terrible for your 1/1. I mean, there's probably better 1/1, like 1-drop options to be playing in Standard right now. We just saw that Dean that only costs 1 black mana, and that looks awesome. So I'm not too sure about this, but the ability to learn when it dies is pretty cool, especially if you can engineer situations where it dies. You know, sacrifice it to a Woe Strider or something, get a ping off a Bastion of Remembrance, go get a card from your sideboard. All this seems like it could be pretty good in specific decks. I mean, a 1-mana dude that effectively draws a card when it dies is actually not bad. But we also got to look at Clever Lumen Answer, which is a really good looking card, Defend the Campus, and Stonebinder's Familiar, which is also pretty sweet. But I'll start with Defend the Campus because I think it's the least powerful of these 3 cards. It's 4 mana, 3 and a white for an instant. Choose 1. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn, or destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Now, I say this is the least powerful of these cards, but it's still pretty good, you know? A modal instant speed spell that has 2 very different things on it, so it's super versatile, whether you're using it to get aggressive, or maybe it's a combat trick when your opponent swings in on very rare occasions. Or, you know, you just kill their Lovestruck Beast or whatever. You know, I think the Giant Killer does a lot of what this card does in decks already, right? Because tapping down a creature when it's on the table, tapping down a creature to help get in other creatures is sometimes going to be worth effectively the same as giving your creatures +1/+1, and while it's in your hand, it does the other mode on this. So I'm not sure how much this actually sees outside of Limited. In Limited, it looks really good because it's removal. That also does something really good for aggressive decks, or will occasionally come in handy. So just the modal versatility on this card makes me really, really like it a lot, but I'm not too sure that it sees much play, especially that mana cost outside of the Limited environment. So I'll move on to Stonebinder's Familiar. It's a 1-drop dog, just 1 white mana for a 1/1 spirit dog, 2 relevant creature types, and whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile during your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Stonebinder's Familiar. This ability only triggers once each turn, so really actually kind of neat. You know, if your opponent casts Extinction Event or something and they choose even, well, suddenly it gets counter. That's kind of cool, but obviously you want to engineer this kind of situation, and there are plenty of ways to do it. You know, if you just cast an Adventure and then the creature half of it goes into exile, well, card went to exile during your turn. That's pretty sweet. If you exile one of your opponent's things, this gets a counter, so that's kind of dope. If you foretell a card and put that into exile, this gets a counter. So there's actually a lot of ways to put counters on this, and it does kind of suck that you can't put more than one counter on it a turn with its own ability, at least. But I still kind of like this, and I like that dogs are getting 1-drops. I'm always going to be a fan of that. Let's finally play some dogs. But I saved Clever Lumimancer here. Did I say Luminancer at first? It's Lumimancer. Which I should have known that because Mancer, sorcerer. Anyway, it's just 1 white mana for a 0/1 human wizard with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Lumimancer gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Oh, light magician, Lumimancer. Oh, that makes sense. But anyway, this has been compared over and over again today to Monastery Swiftspear. And that's actually a fairly apt comparison. Monastery Swiftspear is actually one of my favorite creatures of all time. I really do like Monastery Swiftspear, but I think that not having haste is a relatively big deal. This, however, gets a bigger boost than Swiftspear. So there's that at the very least. It's got cool creature types. It's just a 1-drop in white. You know, I will say that I don't love the idea of dropping this on turn 1 and then on turn 2 you just cast spells and don't really advance your board state swinging with this. You know, I don't love that. I don't love the idea of playing it on curve and then like skipping any real relevance on turn 2 for this card to play a creature, and then turn 3 you start doing things. It just seems kind of slow. And again, that was a big benefit to Monastery Swiftspear, is that you could build your board on turn 1, build your board on turn 2, and then on turn 3 drop Swiftspear and play spells, swing with everything. Like, that was a line with that card. That's not necessarily as present here. So there are things I don't like about it, but I will say that if you just cast like, you know, card draw spell into card draw spell, and suddenly you're swinging for 4 with your 1-drop, and that's not bad. We also saw Mage Hunter and Make Your Mark. Mage Hunter is just a 4-mana 3/4 horror, and whenever an opponent casts or copies an instant or sorcery spell, they lose 1 life. This actually might be really good in Limited, because there's so many instants and sorceries in this set, so if this ends up like dealing 3 or 4 damage to your opponent, plus it has better than Hill Giant stats, it's actually not bad. I can see why they made it uncommon. If it was common, you could get like 2 of them out and your opponent just dies. So the whole reason they made the set is for naught if opponent gets 2 Mage Hunters out. So I can see why they made it uncommon, but it's still a pretty important looking creature to me. But anyway, in Limited, that is. Make Your Mark is just Boros color hybrid, you know, 1 red or white mana for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 till end of turn. When that creature dies this turn, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Well, I do like that they finally made, you know, a Defiant Strike or an effect like this that gives the creature a power boost but not a toughness boost, and yet acknowledges that the creature will die. That's good. That's quite good. They've made a few of those in the past. I'm just kind of like having fun here, but still, this is a decent limited combat trick that'll probably end up upgrading a bunch of, you know, early creatures. So actually pretty decent, and might be an important limited card. Now, there were a few cards left today that aren't Prismari, but I'm going to still save to the end of the video because, like, a lot of them are super bombs. So I want to talk about them when we get into the really good stuff. So let's start the Prismari Junk, and not all of it's junk. There's some really good stuff in here. With Elemental Summoning, this card might be junk, or it might not be. It's 5 mana, 3, and then 2... Is it hybrids? Can we start calling them Prismari hybrids? Is that a thing now? For a lesson, it's a sorcery. This just creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. I was tempted to not even translate this. The card's so simple. But you do need to know it's a sorcery. You do need to know it's a lesson. And I do like lessons that create bodies. The fact that this is a lesson instantly skyrockets, you know, my want to play it. So I'm not sure that this actually ends up seeing a whole lot of one-of sideboard play in Standard, but if you are playing cards that learn in your deck, it might be worth it to have a 4/4 body lurking in the board. We also got to see Igneous Inspiration and Hall Monitor in the mono red offerings today. Just 1 red mana for Hall Monitor. Hall Monitor. It's a 1/1 Lizard Shaman with haste, and you can pay 1 in a red and tap it, and target creature can't block this turn. So that's kind of neat that it has haste, because it's a decent late-game top deck in a lot of situations, but I don't see this seeing a whole lot of Standard play anytime soon, or at least not until rotation, when we're maybe scraping the bottom of the barrel for red 1-drops. But this is still at least somewhat relevant all throughout the game, and if your opponent has a naked board, it can attack when it has haste. If your opponent doesn't, they can take that Lovestruck Beast out of combat. So there's some things I like about this in Constructed, but I mostly think that this is destined for limited play. And even then, I'm not a huge fan of 1-drops that aren't very aggressive, but I guess you could make the case this is aggressive, and in a way is one of the better Raging Goblins we've like ever seen. So that makes me like the card a little better, but we'll move on to Igneous Inspiration. Just 3 mana, 2 and a red for a sorcery that deals 3 damage to any target, and you'll learn. Not bad. I mean, you'll probably play a couple of copies of these in limited at the very least, because it's pretty decent removal at 3 mana. Sucks that it's sorcery speed, but it still takes a body off of the table and effectively draws you a card in that format, where I imagine you'll have a bunch of lessons in the sideboard. But, you know, even in some constructed formats, this will never see play. I should probably move on. In the mono blue offerings, we saw Solve the Equation, which definitely seems like a Quandrix card to me, as well as Resculpt and Frost Trickster. All of these look pretty cool, man. Frost Trickster is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 bird wizard with flying. And when an ETB's tap target creature an opponent controls, that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So the stats and keyword ability of a Windrake, 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. But it's got the Frostlink's ability just slapped onto it. So a strict upgrade to both cards that are already decent and limited. This is actually a pretty great piece, especially at common. These are the stats and text boxes that we want. At this rate, at the common rarity, this is actually amazing. Just for limited, again, I don't really see this breaking through, but hey, maybe some of those Azorius Flyers decks want to play something like this. I don't really think it doesn't go anywhere in constructed, but in limited, this is fantastic. We also get to see Resculpt. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant exile target artifact or creature. Its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. Now, I keep hearing people say you'll never use this on your opponent's stuff, but this is just kind of like better than Angelic Ascension in a lot of ways. That's cool. It also gives blue and, you know, is it decks and whatnot, a way to just exile target thing, you know, without having to deal damage to it, or, oh no, all I have is Bone Crusher Giant, my opponent has an X3. Like, no, just exile that guy for a couple of mana, and that's pretty sweet. Exile Great Hinge and give them a 4/4. Doesn't seem great, but at least you got rid of their hinge, right? Same thing with Embercleave. Your opponent plays Embercleave, throws it on an Annex, and you're going to die that turn? Well, no, I'm going to buy myself a turn for 2 mana by blowing up that Embercleave and giving them a 4/4. So, like, there's a few things I like about this card when played on your opponent's stuff, but what it's mostly been compared to is in Soul Artifact today, and this is just not as good as in Soul Artifact. But this will still, like, sometimes save a creature, effectively upgrade a lot of creatures when your opponent goes to remove them. But that said, we haven't really seen Angelic Ascension used in that capacity in this format, so I doubt we'll see this used in that capacity. But, you know, I will say, you know, mono white has better ways of removing things. Mono blue does not necessarily. So, like, maybe we'll see some mono blue decks use this as an interesting removal piece, perhaps. Like, instead of bouncing a thing or whatever, just no, exile it. Just exile that thing, and then I can bounce the token or whatever. So that's another thing, is that we have ways of getting rid of tokens and whatnot. I can see this seeing some sparing play in very specific decks, but I highly doubt it. Either way, I do like this card. There's a reason I have a lot to say about it. Now, I don't have much to say about Solve the Equation, but that doesn't mean I don't like it. The card's actually kind of cool. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So, Merchant Scroll, this is not, right? But, I mean, I guess it gets more stuff than a Merchant Scroll, right? You're not restricted to, like, blue cards or whatever. So that's not bad. I mean, 3 mana for a tutor that goes and gets, like, the most powerful card in your deck and make sure you always have Ultimatum or something is not bad. I'm fairly certain that's not bad. And this could see, like, one of play in very specific decks, or, like, you know, combo decks in Standard or Historic that are looking for a specific instant or sorcery. A 3 mana tutor might not be terrible. That means they can cast their huge spell on the next turn. So, you know, or maybe you draw this late in the game and you still have mana up for, like, a 5 mana thing after you go get this. So, you know, there are definitely lines I like with this card, and I think it's probably decent on the commander table for all things, you know, all things considered. I think, you know, basically go get whatever you want. The most important instant or sorcery in your deck is always going to be relevant and could see some standard play, but, you know, probably not a whole lot. There actually are a couple of other mono red cards that I missed here. Sudden Breakthrough and Explosive Welcome. Sudden Breakthrough is just a limited combat trick. 1 and a red for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+0. Gains first strike until end of turn. That's how you do combat tricks that give power boost but no toughness boost. You give the creature first strike. And create a treasure token. This is actually probably better than a lot of other limited combat tricks that already see play in their limited environments, like Sure Strike, for instance. It's probably just better and gives you a little bit of ramp, and there are cards that care about treasures in this format, so Actually, I kind of like this in terms of combat tricks. I think it's pretty good in aggressive decks, but probably won't see any standard play. Even though it does make a treasure. That's kind of cool. That's not bad. But Explosive Welcome is 8 mana, 7 and a red for an instant that does 5 damage to any target and 3 damage to any other target, and then you add 3 red mana. So it's effectively costs 5 so long as you have 8 mana. It's kind of a non-bow with Ironcrag Feet because it adds mana. You can cast it with Ironcrag Feet if you have like another mana laying around. But you get the 3 mana and you can't cast anything because you can only cast one more spell after you cast Feet. It's kind of dumb, but I guess you can dump that 3 mana into an activated ability or something. So there's ways to use that mana if you go that route. But either way, I don't think this card actually sees standard play. It is 8 mana. It's 8 mana to cast. And if you're going to spend that much mana on a thing, there's way better stuff you could be casting. There is one more mono red card to look at before we get into the blue, red, gold cards here. And this is maybe the most impactful card of the entire day. Ladies and gentlemen, Grinning Ignis is back. It's a card again. This is ridiculous. In case you've never seen Grinning Ignis, this is 2 and a red for an elemental. That's a 2/2. You can pay red and return it to its hand to add colorless red. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So in case you haven't seen this yet, we have Bergie in standard, which effectively goes infinite with this because, you know, you play it, you get a red mana from Bergie, pop it back to your hand, and then you use that mana to just play it again, and you get a red mana from Bergie, which allows you to use its activated ability to pop it back to your hand, and you play it again. And the entire time you're generating some sort of storm count. So in Historic, guess what? They just gave us Grape Shot. So that's the deck. That is the deck. Grinning Ignis, Bergie, Storm. That's the entire deck. Right there, ladies and gentlemen. So have fun with that in Historic, but in Standard, I'm pretty sure we can do something with this infinite combo as well. So, yeah, pretty hilarious. I'm sure there's other stuff. You know, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, do a thing. I guess this goes like infinite with Impact Trimmers and kills them, so that's neat. Really wish we had Impact Trimmers back in Standard. We made some of my favorite decks of all time when we had Impact Trimmers. But anyway, there is stuff you can do with this in Standard. I guess you can draw your deck with a great hinge out or something. So, you know, there's definitely things you can do that I can't wait to try and mess with. It's crazy they gave us Grinning Ignis. I can't believe that they did that. So get your Bergies now, unless they've already skyrocketed, because they're going to do a lot of stuff with this card. Let's start on these gold cards from the Prismari school today, including Spectacle Mage, which has incredible art, but not a great text box, all things considered. It's 3 mana, 1, a red, and a blue for a 2/2 bird shaman with flying. Instants and sorcery spells you cast with mana value 5 or greater cost 1 less to cast. You may notice this allows you to cast 5-drop instants and sorceries on your next turn. You have a very big brain, so that's pretty cool and all, but I still don't know how much I love this. You know, some of the better instants and sorceries in the format right now don't really have colors in their casting costs, you know, ultimatums and whatnot, so I'm not sure how great that is, but in Limited, this is a decently statted thing. It's got Windrake stats, you know, 3 mana, 2/2 flyer, that's playable, and it ramps you into all of these huge Prismari spells. We've already looked at a couple of them, but there's more like super overcosted Prismari spells to look at today. For instance, Creative Outburst. This costs as much as an ultimatum. 3, 2 blue, and 2 red. 7 mana for an instant. Creative Outburst deals 5 damage to any target. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You can also pay Is It Hybrid, and discard Creative Outburst to create a treasure token. I see a lot of people bagging on this ability because it exists on another Prismari spell that we'll look at a little bit later in the video. The ability to pay 2 hybrid mana, drop it, and get a treasure token. A lot of people are like, it's stupid, I don't like it. I don't understand. It's just extra versatility. How do you not like extra versatility that effectively functions as ramp and lets you play... You know, it's ramp, and is it? It lets you, it lets you play a more expensive spell on the next turn than you otherwise would have. You can do it at instant speed, get a treasure token at the end of your opponent's turn, and suddenly, without your opponent having known it, you're going to have 5 mana on turn 4, so you can gold span or something. Seems good. It really works well with gold span, doesn't it? In any case, everything this card does is actually pretty sweet. It doesn't win the game outright for 7 mana, which kind of sucks in terms of conventional wisdom, but you can still dome your opponent or kill that love-struck beast or hopefully the biggest creature on the table in a lot of cases. And Impulse, a better than Impulse Dig to draw the best card in the top 5 of your library, which is actually quite good. And all of this at the end of your opponent's turn. Again, this is instant speed, so you can do it like during your opponent's combat step or EOT or something. So I kind of like this card more than I should. It's a bit of a trap at 7 mana, but Even though it doesn't win the game outright or anything, I still think that for 7 mana, this card could have been worse. And if you don't want to cast it, you can always get a treasure token out of it, which isn't a bad mode. It's not. But if you want a definitely decent, no speculation, Prismari gold uncommon, here's Expression of Repetition. It's a blue and a red for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand, one at the bottom of your library, and then you exile the other card. Until the end of turn, you may play the exiled card. So what you have here is 2 mana card advantage. Effectively, if you have enough mana to cast whatever you exiled, right? And it might be a land. Remember that you can play a land off of this. So maybe you play it on turn 3 before your land drop, and you drop a land off the exiled card. Could work. It's not bad if you're looking for a land drop, and very often you are in your control deck on turn 3. But, of course, if you play this on turn 3 and then drop a land, that leaves you kind of naked in terms of counter shields and whatnot. So there's a lot to discuss in terms of what decks want to play this and when, like on what turn you actually play this card. I think it's great in terms of like being able to double spell, On turn 5, for instance, I think it'd be nice to drop 2 mana into this and then make your land drop the exiled card. And you got to draw a card off of it effectively. So you still have 3 mana left to counter spells or play removal or play the card that you actually put into your hand. And that's really not bad. I think on the later turns or when you top deck this, it's a fantastic card. Although it's not amazing in the early game or anything, but, as early as turn 3, it can at least create a land drop for you. So there's a lot that I like about this card. I think it's way better than strategic planning and cards that I see people compare it to today. So just keep your eye on this and keep your mind on this because I think this card can do a lot of cool things. Let's look at Melstrom Muse next. This is 4 mana. 1, a blue, a red, and then an Izzet hybrid. And these casting costs look so weird to me on the card. I said it yesterday, I'll say it again. It's a 2/4 genius wizard with flying. That's right, genius. Apparently a creature type. And whenever Melstrom Muse attacks, the next instant or sorcery you cast this turn will cost X less to cast, X being the power of Melstrom Muse as this ability is resolved. That is an interesting translation there. But I think you know what it means. Usually this is going to discount the next instant or sorcery you play by 2. Most of the time. I mean, obviously you can boost this thing's power. We can talk about that later. You can also use instant speed pump effects before you actually attack with it and then swing in with it. So that's, that's pretty good, right? This is actually, this constitutes a lot of ramp, but, it won't do anything outside of limited. But in limited, it's probably good, and it's kind of a signpost uncommon for the blue-red spells deck. And the blue-red spells deck looks very different now. Usually blue-red spells is this I'm going to sling 1 and 2 mana spells, pump up my dudes with prowess or whatever, swing in. It's way different this time, both in limited and constructed. You're doing this thing where you're trying to, play small spells or ramp with treasure tokens in some way, or maybe play creatures that ramp in one way or another. Like the thing that decreases the cost of your spells, or this guy here. You're trying to use ramp in that way to play these just enormous spells, and I think it's a really cool way to design blue-red spells in both limited and constructed. So hats off to Wizards on that. I think you've done a good job doing something a little bit different with Izzet, but still effectively making blue-red spells a thing. So good job on that. But let's move on to Practical Research. This is 5 mana, 3, a blue and a red for an instant. Draw 4 cards, and then discard 2 cards unless you discard an instant or sorcery card. This card kind of looks nuts a little bit. 5 mana is a lot, but it's an instant. That counts. That's a huge deal that it's an instant. And it also draws 4 cards. 5 mana, draw 4 cards, and then just discard an instant or sorcery. I mean, it's kind of a thirst for knowledge or thirst for meaning. It's amazing this doesn't have thirst for something in the title, but, they had to do a school pun instead. Thirst for water fountain, something like that. But anyway, I will say that 5 mana draw 4 at instant speed is dope, and if you can drop an escape card in your graveyard, drop a glimpse or something in your yard, then super gravy. That's really fantastic, in my opinion. I mean, again, I'll keep saying it over and over. 5 mana is a lot, but, instant speed, control deck, draw 4. Who cares? I actually think this might see a little bit of play as time goes on because 5 mana draw 4 at instant speed is just kind of good. Moving on, let's look at Rutha, Mercurial Artist here. Did I say that right? Rutha, Mercurial Artist. Nailed it. 3 mana, 1, a blue and a red for a 1/4 legendary Orc Shaman. It's the uncommon legendary student for the Prismari school. You can pay 2 and return Rutha Artist to its owner's hand. For some reason I have a problem saying Mercurial. Copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copies. Pretty interesting. We do have an uncommon engine for copying spells. I was wondering if we'd see a lot of those. We've already seen a couple of ways to copy spells, but it's good to see more, especially of the uncommon rarity, specifically for the limited environment. This is cool as like a brawl commander or just a commander in general, right? There's plenty of cool things you can do with this. Play huge spells and copy them for a couple of extra mana, and all you got to do is play Rutha again. Not a big deal, right? It seems fun and all that, but it also seems a little bit slow, kind of prohibitively slow, especially in constructed formats that aren't singleton or anything. I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of play in standard Rutha, but I do like the steez of this card. I like the design of it, and I do want to try to do janky stuff in constructed. I just wouldn't expect too much from it there. But in limited, again, this is a signpost uncommon that's effectively an engine for Magecraft decks, and they need that. But now let's look at the ultimate Prismari spell, 8 mana for Magma Opus. You see what they did there? It's 6, a blue, and a red for an instant. At least it's an instant. Opus deals 4 damage, divided as you choose among any number of targets. Tap 2 target permanents. Create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token, and draw 2 cards. And of course, you can do the same thing you can do on the other big spell. You can pay a blue-red hybrid and a blue-red hybrid and discard Opus to create a treasure token. Again, extra versatility is always good. And maybe if you have 2 of these in your hand, you discard 1 to help cast the others. So cool stuff about this. I like the idea of is it ramp in general? Discarding a card to create a treasure token and 2 mana, add instant speed. Again, that's okay. It's not great, but it's okay at the very least. If you need ramp in the early game or you missed a land drop, who knows? There's a lot of reasons I like that last ability on the card, and I definitely think it's one of the cooler parts of the card in a way. Extra versatility is good, but in any case, 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets is probably not going to win the game, right? You cast this during your opponent's combat step, like, well, really, before they move to attacks. Then you can tap 2 of their creatures down, kill another one, or hit them for 4. If you cast it after they attack, the tap 2 target permanents won't be as good, but the 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token will be way better. In that case, you can ambush them with the 4/4 before, after they attack. And then draw 2 cards is always going to be good. To be honest, for 8 mana, 4 damage, draw 2 cards, get board presence is really not that bad considering the instant speed. So I'm not sure how much standard play this ends up seeing or anything, especially when we have Ugin and Genesis Ultimatum and a bunch of cards that cost as much or slightly less than this and are just like probably way better, but none of those cards can be cast at instant speed, and we're forgetting that. We've seen a bunch of sorceries that look really good this season, and we have to say like, oh, but it's a sorcery, so it's not as good and blah, blah. That should also work in the inverse, right? If we see a card like this, we shouldn't immediately compare it to Ugin the Spirit Dragon because you can't play Ugin the Spirit Dragon at the end of your opponent's turn or during their combat steps. This looks a little bit more attractive for those purposes, and even though it doesn't win the game outright or anything, I do think that it effectively causes scoops in a lot of situations, because if your opponent if you're into a situation where you're both in top deck mode or something and you try to swing in on your opponent, or you say go and your opponent taps down your 2 guys, creates a 4/4, draws 2, kills your other biggest guy or whatever, you're just going to scoop in that situation. Like the card will win the game some of the time. So I like this more than a lot of people like it, but I acknowledge that 8 mana is a lot of mana. But one of my favorite Prismari cards of the day is isn't colors, like it's not gold or anything. It's just a mono blue card called Multiple Choice. Now this is probably actually a Quandrix card, right? Because it's math oriented. But it is a mono blue card, and I wanted to throw it in here towards the end. I thought it'd be a good segue from Prismari into stuff that's not Prismari again. But Multiple Choice is X and a blue for a sorcery. If X is 1, scry 1, then draw a card. If X is 2, you may choose a player. They return a creature they control to its owner's hand. If X is 3, create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token, and if X is 4 or more, you do it all, baby. You do all of the above, which is what I want to be doing. For 5 mana, not a terrible rate, especially considering it's a really splashable card. It only costs the 1 blue mana ever, so you can play this in 3 and 4 color decks fairly easily if you wanted to. And for 5 mana, even at sorcery speed, you get a 4/4 body, you bounce a thing, even though you don't get to pick it. You bounce a thing and you draw a card, and that's actually really good. For 5 mana, that's actually pretty decent, you know. Making, especially in limited, making a 4/4 body for 4 mana is above rate a lot of the time. It's right on rate nowadays, I think. Even though the bounce effect isn't super desirable at 3 mana sorcery speed, there are going to be times where this is nominally worth it. You know, your opponent only has 1 creature out or something. And it's an important creature, so either they can bounce their Lovestruck Beast back to their hand and not attack with it next turn, or they can bounce the 1/1 and not attack with Lovestruck Beast. So that can be a kind of cool mode some of the time. And then the first mode is actually kind of decent as a top deck. You get this on turn 6, you're looking for the sweeper or something else, a specific card that keeps you alive or something. Then this at least, like, you can kind of cycle it, right? You cast Opt for double the mana, but you still get to just, like, kind of cycle through this card. It doesn't matter that you drew it. You still get another chance to draw a card that wins you the game that turn, and you get to scribe with it too. So, there were situations where, again, situationally, I think that's the right word. Situationally, there are times where each mode on this card will be worth casting the card for a lower mana cost. But once you get all 5, really, really good card here. It's not quite Sublime Epiphany or anything, but it's still a decent Magic card. So I like this. I don't think it's as nuts as I first thought it was, but I still think this is a solid Magic card. This might actually do some work in some environment. Oh, whoops, I missed the Prismari card, actually. Here's Culmination of Studies, which again, another card I feel like they could have waited for the last day to preview this because it's just too perfect. But it's X, a blue, and a red for a sorcery. Exile the top X cards of your library. For each land card exiled this way, create a treasure token. For each blue card exiled that way, draw a card. For each red card exiled that way, Culmination of Studies deals 1 damage to each opponent, and sorcery speed really hurts this. But, it could just win you the game, or it couldn't. It could maybe not win you the game. I guess if you have a bunch of red cards in your deck and you mill a buttload of them or something, then you are dealing a lot of damage to your opponent. But that's just like a sideways fireball that only hits face, and that's not really a good way to look at the card. If you exile like 2 blue cards and draw 2, and 2 red cards and hit your opponent for 2, that's probably not worth 6 mana at sorcery speed, I guess if you exile lands, getting treasure tokens is kind of good, but I just don't see a rate that I really like this card at. At 3 mana, it's not really good unless it draws you a card, and even then you drew 1 card at sorcery speed for 3 mana, which is worse than divination, so I don't love that. It's just, I'm wanting to say that this card scales up really well, kind of like Hydroid Krasis or something, but it probably doesn't. It probably actually doesn't scale up that well. I think maybe they're just afraid after like Expansion Explosion, and even before Expansion Explosion, it seemed like they were kind of afraid of these fireball effects in Standard, and they wanted to either nerf them or, just make them not so straightforward, and they've tried a bunch of different designs with these fireballs, and this one is just kind of a miss for me, but again, I'm willing to be proven wrong on this, because for a certain amount of mana, drawing 2 or 3 cards and dealing a couple damage to the opponent isn't terrible. So, I don't mind this, but I do think that it's probably not good enough to see much Standard play. But let's move on to the just amazing, like, non-Prismari stuff from the day, and then we'll wrap it up with one more Prismari card. That's an Elder Dragon. But I want to move back to yesterday where we missed Flame Scroll Celebrant and Revel in Silence. This is Flame Scroll Celebrant is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/1 human shaman. And whenever an opponent activates an ability that isn't a mana ability, Flame Scroll Celebrant deals 1 damage to that player. You can also pay 1 and a red and have Celebrant get +2/+0 till end of turn, which is a relevant ability on an otherwise kind of ho-hum 2-drop stats and rate-wise. But, I really like the first ability, the first line of text. These sort of Punisher effects are very hit or miss historically, but this one's pretty good in a format with like Fabled Passage and a fair number of other activated abilities. So I don't hate this card, and again, I think as far as like mono red 2-drops once rotation hits, this has a pretty good chance, but even maybe before rotation hits in a Boros deck, this could be a desirable 2-drop because it might end up pinging your opponent 2 or 3 times over the course of a game, and that's exactly what I want out of my 2-drop. In Modern, it's even better because there's fetch lands in Modern and stuff, so I could definitely see this finding a foothold there too. It's just a pretty solid card just on its front face, but you also get Revel in Science. Revel in Science. That would have been the pun. Wizards, where are you at? But anyway, Revel in Silence is 2 white mana for an instant that is Abeyance. I mean, I just compared a card to Abeyance the other day. This is even more Abeyance than that. Your opponents can't cast spells or activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities this turn. You exile Revel. So that's really good. You cast it on your opponent's draw step or during their upkeep, and they can't cast the sweeper this turn. That would annihilate you or whatever. They can't cast the Genesis Ultimatum or Virgin Ultimatum, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, whatever. Just name whatever. They're going to blow you out with that turn. And they can't cast it that turn. You get that one turn to win the game. So, rip this off the top in the late game when you've got the right board state, and it's pretty good. But if you get it on turn 2, you can just play a decent creature with it that acts as a mana sink later in the game. A lot I like about this card, and I think it might become a very important one moving into the future in multiple formats. Historic, standard, and possibly even modern. It's a very good card. But let's move on to a card that might not be super good, but it is a card that I can't wait to play with. This is going to be a great commander. Cody! Cody! Vociferous Codex. That's right. All of you out there named Cody, you finally have your own card. It's 3 mana for a legendary artifact creature. It's a construct, and it's a 1/4, so it's unboltable. You can pay 4 and tap it to add 1 of each color. When you cast your next spell this turn, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile an instant or sorcery card with lesser mana value. Until end of turn, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put each other card exiled this way in the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is really cool. 5-color commander with a really interesting restriction. You just can't play enchantments, you can't play artifacts, you can't play creatures, so you might as well not have any of those in your deck, right? Cody in your command zone is pretty much the only one. The rest of your deck is all removal and card draw and ridiculous combo pieces and, game-winning 8 and 9 mana spells or whatever. So really, really cool deck. 5-color commanders are usually my jam, especially when they are colorless. And there's just so many ways to build around this card that's going to be super fun. It's going to be fun in Brawl even. In a much smaller format, I can still imagine this card still being a fun one to play. I don't know about in constructed formats like Standard or anything. I'm not holding my breath, but I do think it's kind of cool. It's a form of ramp. You play it on turn 3, and then on turn 4, you can cast a 5-drop spell and something else, which actually seems a little bit pushed in a lot of ways, but it is one of those creatures that you play it on 3 and your opponent has a chance to remove it before you can actually use it. And Lord knows, not a huge fan of those cards, but it is, again, a little bit harder to remove than the average dude at 4 toughness, so there's that, right? There's a lot of things I do like about this. Even in constructed Magic. And I want to try to make it work because it's about as janky as you get in terms of card design. This looks like a Gavin card, if I had to guess. But in any case, I really want to play this in constructed Magic, but I'm way more excited to play it in singleton formats where it's probably going to be a sought-after card for a long time, But speaking of colorless rares, let's hop back into the present day where we got to see Wandering Archaic, the Eldrazi vibes. Just getting stronger and stronger every day, aren't they? Wandering Archaic is 5 mana for a 4/4 avatar. And whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2. If they don't, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Hilarious. Explore the Vast Lands is the other side of this card. That's right. That's not good enough. It's 3 mana for a sorcery. Each player looks at the top 5 cards of their library, reveals a land card and or an instant or sorcery card from among them, puts the cards they revealed into their hand, the cards they revealed into their hand, and the rest in the bottom of their library in a random order, and then each player gains 3 life. Really, really neat on both halves, right? I mean, 5 mana for a 4/4 that has a weird form of ward. If they cast a removal spell on it, you get to remove one of their guys, which is cool. If they cast, a card draw spell, and they don't pay an extra 2, you get to copy their card draw spell. This reminds me of actually kind of a lot of highly played commander cards, right? So I could see this actually seeing some play in that format, especially considering any deck can play it. And I kind of feel like this might be pushed for constructed. I mean, a 5 mana 4/4 are not good stats, but, if your opponent plays a Genesis Ultimatum, you also get a Genesis Ultimatum, which I'm kind of a fan of. If your opponent casts a counterspell, you get to counter their counterspell, which I think is also kind of neat, unless they pay 2 mana. So I love the front half of this. I think there's a lot of cool implications for it that we don't necessarily see yet. But Explore the Vastlands is also cool, It's kind of a card selection piece that any deck gets to play because it's symmetrical, It's colorless. You can play it in your white deck, but that also means your opponent gets to get a instant or sorcery or land or whatever off the top of their library and gain 3 life. But certain control decks that don't have access to better pieces might like a card like this. I just think it's a really, really cool design, and I can gush about it all day. I'm not sure it actually sees a ton of play at the end of the day in constructed formats, but I do really like the design of it, and I hope that it sees some play. We're getting down to the wire here. Not too many cards left to cover today, but all the cards we do have left to cover are really cool, like Extus Ulrich Overlord. We finally see this thing. It's 4 mana, 1 a white and 2 black for a 2/4 legendary human warlock with double strike and Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So, yeah, crazy, right? I mean, this is another one of those things, though, that has to be in play for a turn before you actually get any real value out of it. But most of the time, I mean, if you have 6 mana or something, if you have 5 mana, and you can cast this into Duress or some other similar 1 mana spell or something, then suddenly you get value the turn that you play it. And that's actually pretty good, I imagine. Pumping 5 mana into this, 4 to cast it and then casting a spell afterwards, is actually probably incredible. So that's good. And if it does sit around on the table for a while, God forbid it gets any equipment or power boosts of any kind from Anthem effects, suddenly, 3, 4, 5 power double strike is a real threat to have to deal with. But what's cool about Exodus is that it's actually stapled to another card. Did you know that? Yeah, you probably did, because of the thing at the bottom left-hand corner of Exodus. But anyway, we also got to see Awaken the Blood avatar, which is the other side of Exodus, and confirms that some of these cards are, 3 colors. We get a Mardu guy, a Mardu mythic basically, which I'm always into. But Blood Avatar is 8 mana. That's a lot of mana. 6, a black and a red for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. The spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. Create a 3/6, weird stats, a 3/6 black and red avatar creature with haste, and whenever this creature attacks, it deals 3 damage to each opponent. So it has haste. That means it's pretty much immediately going to deal 3 damage to the opponent. You still get a creature out of it, your opponent goes down a creature, and you effectively get a bolt if your opponent doesn't immediately have a removal spell. So, the card looks good, all things considered. And even though I don't know that it has quite the juice to stand up in Standard, it does kind of synergize with itself because you can sacrifice stuff and then use Exodus to get the stuff that you sacrifice back. So, that's a cool little wrinkle, I guess. But all things considered, like the card an awful lot. Don't have the highest of hopes for it, but it's going to be one of the first cards I build around in Standard once the set is available. But new card alert, everybody. Here's Teachings of the Archaics here. This is brand new, and I have never read it before. This is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. It's a lesson. Oh, okay. It's the mono blue rare lesson. If an opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw 2 cards. Draw 3 cards instead if an opponent has at least 4 more cards in hand than you. Okay, that's interesting. Especially as a lesson that you can go grab from the sideboard, You go learn if you're in top deck mode. And then it's basically a divination in that case. If they have a buttload of cards in their hand, like they just cast Into the Story or something like that, and they're way ahead, then you draw 3 for that 3 mana, and that's way, way better. But honestly, a divination that doesn't have to be in your main deck is really good too, Just spend 1 card, get 2 cards for 3 mana is always going to be at least a decent deal, and the fact that this is a lesson makes that much better. So I can get why this is a rare, and I can get why people get Eldrazi vibes from this set too. Look at that. But let's get to the next to the last card of the day here. I don't know why, but we already get to see the Quandrix Elder Dragon Legend. You'd think they would save that for Quandrix Day, but in any case, Tanazir Quandrix is 5 mana, 3 a blue and a green for a 4/4 Elder Dragon. It's a legend, and it has Flample, but flying and trample. And when it ETBs, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. And whenever Quandrix attacks, you may have the base power and toughness of other creatures you control become equal to Tanazir Quandrix's power and toughness until end of turn. This is weird to me in a lot of ways, right? Because you double the number of +1/+1 counters on another creature, probably not Quandrix, right? But then you can have the other creature's base power and toughness become Quandrix's until end of turn whenever it attacks. And I wish that you just put the counters on Quandrix in some way or another, and then have everybody's base power and toughness become that. But it's just, I don't know, it looks weird to me. I guess the cool thing about this is that you have like a 1/1 or a 2/2 or a 0/0 with a bunch of counters on it. And then when this attacks, you make that thing like your Swarm Shambler's base power is 4/4 with a bunch of tokens, or a bunch of counters rather. Or Yorvo, right? Same difference. It's 0/0. It's got 4 counters on it. You double the number of counters on it. And then you make its base power and toughness 4/4, so it's got like 12 counters. Like, all of that makes sense. I think this card is cool. But at the same time, just kind of a by the numbers, like Simic, I work with +1/+1 counters. Yeah, ho-hum. I have liked a lot of these Elder Dragons that we've seen so far, including the other one we're about to look at, which I think is actually really, really good. But this one I'm just not as excited about, and I apologize for that, Simic players. But let's look at the Prismari Elder Dragon Legend, which I actually think is pretty good. This is Galazeth Prismari. 4 mana, 2 a blue and a red for a 3/4 legendary Elder Dragon with flying. And when it ETBs, create a treasure token. Artifacts you control have tap, add a mana of any color, use this mana only to cast instant and sorcery spells. So, earlier I said that it looks like the blue-red spells philosophy this time around is a little bit different than it usually is. Instead of playing cheap spells to, proc prowess or whatever, benefit your creatures, instead you're using your creatures and other cards that ramp or create treasure tokens to ramp into these huge spells, and I really like that fresh take. Well, this is kind of the ultimate card that lets you ramp into those huge spells. And the one that, for what it's worth, is the most standard viable out of all of these cards that effectively let you ramp into huge spells and whatnot. Like, this makes me think that might actually be a real strategy in standard. This effectively only costs 3 mana. You have to have 4 mana to cast it in the first place, but whatever. You pay your 4 mana, you cast this spell, and then you get a treasure token. So you can play, Goldspan for cheaper if you don't get a land drop on the next turn or something like that. You can use this to help play, Genesis ultimatums and whatnot, at least in its color combination. But you can use this to play any high-value spell in the format, including Magma Opus or like any of these huge instant spells we've looked at today. And even outside of the limited environment, I think that's a really cool use for the card. It creates some sort of value when it enters the battlefield. It creates a treasure token. So even if your opponent does something about it, it still did something that materially affected the game state for you, other than just getting a removal spell out of your opponent's hand. So I like that. It works well not just with treasure tokens, because it turns all your treasure tokens into moxes. Like prismatic rainbow moxes. So that's good enough. The treasure token it creates while it's on the battlefield taps for any color. That's good. That's really good too. It creates that kind of value for the turn at ETBs. But any other treasure you happen to have laying around before you play this, they instantly become Moxen that just tap for mana too without having to sacrifice them. That's disgusting. It makes a lot of treasure producing cards way, way better. So there's that. Maze Mine Tome or any other artifacts you might have lying around. Suddenly, your supplies, your spare supplies tap for any color mana. That's really good. Your Maze Mine again taps for any color mana. That's actually really sweet. So there's a lot that I like about this card. Just, not even in a vacuum. I think there's a fair amount of support for it in standard right now. Whether you're trying to, ramp into Goldspan by sacking the token, or you're trying to tap the tokens to ramp into huge spells. You got a lot of options, and in the meantime, you have a 4 mana body that creates value in the meantime. I keep saying in the meantime. That creates value. I'm excited about this card and I can't talk. So I've seen a lot of people bag on it already today. Like, I'm not super impressed by this. Kind of the same reaction I had to Quandrix Elder Dragon. I think this actually is maybe the most playable Elder Dragon that we've seen so far in the context of current standard. I really like the Lorehold Dragon a lot, and I geeked out about like reanimating it. I want to do that. That seems cool. Fun deck and all. Is it standard viable? I don't know. The Black-White Elder Dragon we've gotten to see. It's just kind of too fair, The blue-green one is a little bit boring, although it's probably powerful. It's just kind of boring, and I don't care. This, on the other hand, does a lot of really, really cool stuff, instantly creates value, makes it easier to play big spells, is a body in and of itself with a form of evasion. There's just so many cool things about this card that point to standard viability to me. So I think this is easily one of the strongest cards of the day, and I wouldn't say get used to seeing it all the time, but get used to seeing it some of the time. I think this will do something at some point during its standard tenure. Okay, there's also this guy, Prismari Pledge Mage. Magecraft, he loses Defender. I miss that guy. But anyway, that's all of the Strixhaven cards today. Are you getting excited about this set yet? I still don't understand the people who are like, who cares? That looks pretty swinging to me so far. So let me know how you feel about all the cards from today. Down there in the comments section, I think there's some pretty ballin' cards. The first couple of days we kept saying like, I don't know if any of this looks really viable or not, but like I think we looked at multiple cards in the last 2 days that are going to shake up standard and historic and even modern in some cases in various ways, and just some really powerful stuff. That Lorehold, the Boros card, that's a 2/1 for 2 mana on its front side that punishes activated abilities, and it's an abeyance on its second side. I think that card is ridiculous. I think that card is like one of the better cards we've seen in the set so far. So, and not because it's overly powerful, just because because it's so versatile. That's what I like about this set, is that it's a fairly complex set with a lot of text, and a lot of the cards do a lot of different things or have a lot of versatility or different modes. And I'm just a sucker for it, man. I really like the increase in complexity lately without necessarily a corresponding increase in power. That's a really tough thing to pull off. It's weird because, Kaldheim, not the most complex set in the world, but it had a buttload of words in the set. We've heard a lot about that. Kaldheim has like the most words of any set. This looks like it may break Kaldheim's record by a healthy margin, just in terms of card complexity, especially at the common and uncommon level. Cards are relatively complex. Again, relative is doing a lot of work there. It's relative to a lot of Magic sets. The cards are fairly complex, but the cards don't feel broken or busted. And again, commend Wizards for that. Kudos to that, because that's a really difficult line to straddle. So the set looks really good to me in terms of design and what I'm excited to play with. But again, let me know how you feel about it down there in the comments section, especially specifically anything we talked about today. Can you tell I've had a lot of coffee today? I'm buzzing. But anyway, I think I'm done for this one. Just hit the like button and sub to the channel if you haven't done it yet. Hit the bell for the notifications so you actually get notified. I don't know why it's a two-step process. Just do what YouTube wants. It only takes 5 seconds. But in any case, that would mean a lot to me if you subbed. We're looking for more subs, as always. We're a YouTube channel. That's how it works. But also, I think I'll be doing spoilers tomorrow, which is Wednesday, just so you know, on Twitch. So head on over to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev, hit the link in the description and follow there, because around, I think, 8 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be getting on stream to talk about the spoilers of the day, and I will end up uploading that VOD to YouTube, but it probably won't be till the next day. So if you want to do spoilers tomorrow, I'm trying a social experiment. Head on over to Twitch at 8 p.m. EST, and I will be talking about all tomorrow's spoilers, which might be today by the time you watch this video. Wednesday spoilers. Twitch. Again, they'll end up on YouTube, but I'll be doing them originally on Twitch. What's up, Strictly Squad? Can't wait to see you there. But in any case, what else? Patreon? Yeah, sure. Go to patreon.com/SBMTG. Link in the description. $1 a month is all I ask, and I feel like I'm worth it. And with that $1, you have earned yourself the power to vote on what decks we do all next season when we get into Strixhaven Standard. So honestly, I think it's a fairly good deal. It helps out the channel incredibly, like a buttload. So help me out by doing that if you're into it. If not, I'm just glad that you're here. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.